The T in TCG stands for tree. Today I went to a flagship battle and I won. Let's go. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my thinking going into this tournament, how I prepared, the deck list that I used, and a couple of interesting moments within my matchups. If you're interested in this leader for OP11, I've put in an insane amount of games and thinking into this leader, and I hope that in this video I can talk just a little bit about how I think about into deck building, because although the core of this deck is very similar for many decks, the way that you play out the game just on these small differences in cards is very interesting to me. And as we're kind of in the midpoint of OP11 and I was able to win a flagship today, I want to talk about how my list is right now. I will have another video coming out on the general state of OP11, so stay tuned for that. Hey, make sure to like and subscribe to the video. I always forget to say that. Let's get into the video. Going into this flagship battle, it was really a no-brainer for me to bring BP Luffy, as it is by far the best deck right now in OP11. I did actually consider bringing Noshinante for a small period of time, due to the fact that I think I could beat a lot of people off of them not understanding how my deck works. However, I decided not to bring Noshinante because of a meta change that's happened within this last week. I'm sorry to say, Lucci is back. Lucci has been overperforming at a lot of unofficial tournaments recently as a deck that can effectively counter everything that tries to beat Blue-Purple Luffy in things like aggro decks like Zoro and Bella Betty, and also it has a really good Green-Purple Luffy matchup. The core of the second OP11 does not revolve around the 9-cost Kaido like it does in the West, but around 10-cost Kuzan. This secret rare that many people have forgotten about from OP02 is very powerful in this meta with no removal. As such, Blue-Purple Luffy, a deck that tends to get stronger and stronger as the game goes on, can actually end up losing to Lucci if he has enough time to stably play his 10-cost Kuzan. About 1 week ago, my theory on the most popular decks within the meta would be Blue-Purple Luffy at the top, Green-Purple Luffy next, and then Bella Betty and Zoro as the next couple of picks. However, because Lucci came up so suddenly as a counter to not only Zoro, Bella Betty, and Green-Purple Luffy, but also does decently into Blue-Purple Luffy, I was expecting that there'd be a massive shift in what people play in this week. As such, my theory was that for this flagship battle, people are going to almost overcompensate for how powerful they think Lucci is and bring a lot of Lucci. With this in mind, I decided that I'm just not going to tech for aggro decks, and instead I'm going to tech for Lucci. In the deck profile, I talk about some of these decisions that I made to tech for Lucci, and although I didn't end up hitting Lucci on the day, there were a lot of Lucci around me, and I was really hoping to hit them to show off my tech card. Why am I doing a deck profile on the grass in the rain? I don't know, but if you hit like, then I'll keep doing it. Before I explain card by card, I want to show you these are the cards that I've won so far with this deck in this format. I have 2 local wins, I have a top 8 in a flagship, I got top 16 at Bandai Card Fest, and then my flagship win yesterday. The deck's been treating me really well, and I hope to just keep expanding on these cards, and I hope this leader keeps being good because I enjoy playing it. This deck generally only has 3 types of cards in the deck. There's ramp cards, there's top end, and then there's defensive cards. This includes 2000 counters as well as things like blockers. It's how you balance these cards and which ones you choose to use that can drastically change not only if you go first or second, but also how you play out your turns up until the late game. So for this deck profile, I won't be going by the cost of the cards, but I'll be going by the types of cards. Starting with the ramp cards. In this deck, I run 16 ramp cards, and that's a lot more than a lot of people tend to run. Starting with Zorojiro, many people in Red-Purple Luffy past things like OP10, EB01 stopped running the Zorojiro despite it being searchable, and the reason for this was because it was very easily removed by things like Lucci as well as Doflamingo. However, because these 2 decks have drastically come down in popularity with the recent bans, and people choosing to play things like Green-Purple Luffy who don't have any sort of board clear, Zorojiro tends to stick to the board. And if Zorojiro can stick to the board, then he's just an exceptionally powerful card. The 4-cost Banklei is arguably the strongest ramp card that's ever been printed, and the price definitely echoes that sentiment. The 3rd card is a new OP11 card, so people may not be that familiar with it. It's a 1-cost card that if I rest 2 more Dong, then I can gain 1 Dong rested. Effectively, it's just a one-time use Onigashima. However, it also has a counter effect, which gives me plus 3000 power to my leader. Importantly, this is leader only, but similar to the way that Divine Departure has 2 different effects, this one also does a similar sort of thing. As this card can ramp you in the early game and become counter in the late game, it's just exceptionally powerful. All of these cards, these 3 cards all have counter as well as the ability to ramp, so I don't think I can ever come down on these because they never become bricks in my hand, and they always can help me in the early and late game. The one card that does become a brick is Shinhodo Oishi. This card, similar to Gear 2nd, gives me 1 Dong for 3 Dong. The one difference is that this card also has the potential to give me 2, it gives it to me active, and also has the trigger. Now, The reason why I decided to run this card is because it's effectively a 2-cost ramp immediately. And this is really good in the early turns if I want to attach Dong to my characters or leader and hit something, or if I want to play another thing on the same turn. For example, when you're going second, on the 7 Dong turn, you can use Shinhodo Oishi to gain 1 active Dong, and then now you're at 5 Dong. With your remaining 5 Dong, you can play the 5-cost Nami and have a blocker and 10 Dong next turn. Because it's so cheap, it helps me potentially triple ramp. If you're going second, you always only want to ramp twice. When you're going first, however, getting 1 ramp's okay, getting 2 is fine, getting 3 is basically game winning. And shout out to my math major friend Thomas for doing the math for me. You can realistically triple ramp 1 out of every 4 games if you have this specific set of 16 cards. And if you think about it like I'm guaranteed to win 1 out of every 4 games by default, I think that's quite powerful. There are a few other ramp cards that people tend to run, but I decided not to run in this deck. The first one, and one that people are playing a lot recently, is Thunder Bagua. Now, Thunder Bagua, although it is a 2-cost ramp event, which is exactly what I was looking for, that also has counter, it's kind of difficult to use in a lot of situations. You need to be at 2 life or less, meaning that you're forced to take the first hit, and a lot of the times the first hit is the smallest hit. So although this card's very powerful and does exactly what I wanted to do, just being a 2-cost event, meaning that I can't play it on 10 Dong turn with a 9-cost, and also forcing me to take my first life, just didn't really sit well with me, so I decided not to run it this time. Another ramp card that you don't see as much recently is Okanban Daisaigai, I forgot what the English name is. This card has the strongest ramp trigger in the game, but because of the situation I talked about before with playing Shinhodo Oishi on the same turn as playing things like blockers or pudding, I didn't want to run this card because although it's a powerful ramp event, I can't really do anything else on that turn because it's 4 cost. The last ramp event that I want to talk about is actually a tech that I started. A couple of weeks ago, I played God Thread in one of my tournaments, and I did quite well. And since then, most lists now run God Thread. It's a really powerful card, being a 5-cost event that clears the opponent's board and gives you 1 active Dong. I thought I was really special for finding this tech, and now everyone's basically running it, but I actually took it out yesterday, right before my tournament. And the reason why I did this is because I put in, as you'll see very soon, the top end cards that I put in. As I have a lot of rush top end in my deck, I tend to play this deck a little bit more aggressively than usual. And for this reason, I really wanted to put in more pudding. But to make pudding useful, I want to also play it in the early game because in the early game, my leader is base 6,000 power and I'm only ramping. I have a lot of extra Dong to be able to hit the leader really hard. This means that there's a lot of situations where the opponent is at 8 cards in hand and 2 less life than what they started with. So if I ramp on the same Dong as playing pudding, then it can really devastate the opponent. While God Thread is good, it cannot do this. If you play God Thread, that's the only card that you play on your turn. Although you can get rid of one of the opponent's characters and ramp, which is very, very powerful, it slows down the game. Because I'm playing this deck a lot more aggressively than the standard blue-purple Luffy list, I decided that I don't want this stalling card, and instead I just want to go as hard as possible, potentially have triple ramps with things like Shinhodo Oishi, and also have timings to be able to play pudding in the early game. By default, basically every single deck is going to have 4 9 Sanji and 4 9 Mom. The reason why 9 Mom especially is so powerful is because it just stalls the game. A lot of the time with this deck, you don't really need to be winning the game, you just need to be stalling the game. Because eventually, because this leader can draw 2 cards per turn, you will end up winning out in resources. As such, by just playing 9 Mom a couple of times, in a lot of matchups, it just gives you enough time to be able to win out the game eventually. Sanji can sometimes feel like a win more card, but the first Sanji that you play is extremely important because it helps give you another free 9,000 power line. When you're fighting for the board, this 9,000 power line is really important. And as such, although you won't be playing every single Sanji that you see, you want to be seeing this as early as possible, and therefore I think that this card should be at 4 by default. Where deck building is really divided is in these other cards. People tend to run anywhere from 7 to 13 high-end cards aside from 9-cost Sanji. The default setup that most people have is 2 9-cost Luffy and 4 8-cost Katakuri. But I don't run any Katakuri. Lucci recently has been coming up as an answer to this deck due to the fact that 10-cost Kuzang, once he sticks to the board, can just keep permanently clearing. 8-cost Katakuri does not affect the board immediately at all, so I deemed it too slow. Although it's very good in things like the mirror and against some sort of aggro matchups, I wanted a way to be able to take some initiative in these games and not just stall out and hope that eventually I can win out through a resource game. As such, I put in a lot more aggressive options to take the battle to them. 8-cost Luffy, while being on paper a very good anti-aggro card, is actually a very good anti-Lucci card. Because against Lucci, I'm not trying to just outlive the opponent until I eventually win through resources. Due to the fact that he has things like 10-cost Kusan in the deck, if I give him enough time to be able to play those, then eventually I will lose. All of Lucci's blockers are 4-cost or less, so this lets me hit the leader while constantly giving back their blockers to the hand so that they have to defend these cards out of hand or take the life. As such, by putting pressure onto the opponent, I make it so that the opponent is forced into a bad spot where they can't play Tenkosu Kuzan. The other option for the Lucci matchup is to play things like Red Rock, but I just thought this would be more interesting and fun and more usable into a lot of other matchups, as in the mirror an 8000 power rush is still powerful, and of course in these aggro matchups being able to bounce a character and hit another one is also very good. Generally in the mirror you don't fight for the board, you just keep hitting leader and hope that you're the first one to be able to topple the opponent. It's for this reason that this 10,000 power line, which means that even with Giganto you still need to cut another 1000, is so powerful. And as such, people tend to run 2 by default, but just to make sure that I don't drop these mirrors, I decide to run 3-3 split. As I mentioned, the default for top end is generally 4-9 Sanji, 4-9 Mom, 4-8 Katsukatori, and 2-9 cost Luffy. And while the cards and ratios is different for this list that I decide to run today, there are 2 other cards that I see sometimes here and there within Blue Purple Luffy lists. So let's talk about those. The first one is 7 cost Kirosu. 7 cost Kirosu is a 7 cost 9000 that bounces back a 5 cost. When you're going second, after you ramp once on 4, you're going to be at 7 dong the next turn. And on this 7 dong turn, if you can play a 7 cost 9000, it's really, really powerful, not only in the mirror, but against some other aggro matchups as well. The reason why you don't see it that much recently is because of the other tech card that a lot of people are running, 9 cost Mihawk. This Mihawk being able to bottom a 7 cost not only is good into things like Kirosu, but it's also very good into things like Green Purple Luffy, where their Sanji and Pudding can become 7 cost with the stage effect. Not only this, but because Red Blue Marco is here and there, being able to get rid of the opponent's 7 cost Newgate is very valuable as well. But the reason why I decided not to run it is because I just feel like it's kind of slow. It doesn't give me life, so it doesn't stall the game as hard as 9 cost Mom does. It doesn't have rush, so I can't really put the pressure on the opponent. It just gets rid of a character. And while this is very good into certain matchups, I want a little bit more out of my deck. The first type of defensive card that I run are 2000 counters. Now, I run 10 2000 counters, and these are the ones that I choose to use. There's a couple of different cards that people try to use, but I think that this ratio and these cards are the best for me. Usohachi, just being the best purple 2000 counter, and also being searchable off of the leader effect is just a no-brainer inclusion, but these two are actually points of debate. Some people don't run the Nami and instead run the new 5 cost 6000 2000 counter Chopper. Some people also swap the ratios of these and have 4 Nami and 2 Sanji. However, I think that Sanji should be 4 because there are a lot of turns past 9 dong where you just want to play a blocker, leave up a lot of dong for your counter events, and put dong onto your characters and leader to keep hitting while stalling the game out. While Nami can provide some interesting utility being able to return a small blocker to the opponent's hand for just 1 dong, I think that the potential defensive capabilities of Sanji on these last couple of turns is much more valuable, so that's why I run 4 of these. I would run 4 Nami if I could, but due to the space in the deck, I can only justify running 2. The other type of defensive card that I run is blockers and Gum Gum Giant. Nami is just a ridiculously overstated, broken blocker. This card is really just ridiculous, and for the move that I was talking about before, where you just play a blocker, leave up dong for counter events, and then put dong onto your characters, this is really just the best card in the game for that. You can play this card on 7 to be able to set up for 9 Sanji on 9. You can put the 2 cards to the top of your deck, so you decide to draw the first one, and then you play the second one off of 9 cost Sanji, letting you get to 9 cost Sanji exceptionally fast. I don't know why they thought it was okay to print this card when they have things like Rayleigh or Queen that exist that have a clear cost to activate the effect, and this one just does not have a cost and is also stronger, but it makes this deck stronger, so of course I'm going to have to run 4 of it. Gum Gum Giant, on the other hand, although I think is probably the strongest card that's ever been printed in this game, I only run 3 of. And the reason for this, aside from some space issues, although I do want to run 4, is because when you play things like 9 cost Mom or 9 cost Luffy, on your 10 dong turn, you go down to 9 dong. If you then use Gum Gum Giant, then you go down to 7 dong. And as your leader effect needs you to be at 8 dong at the start of your turn to activate, this means that you can't actually use Gum Gum Giant on every single turn. Just to make sure that it doesn't end up being a brick every single time that I draw it, I decided to put it down to 3. I think that if you have the space though, putting 4 in and then just playing more carefully around it is very good too. The final card that I run that's not really in any one of these categories is Pudding. And this is a bit of a contentious card. A lot of people run 1, a lot of people run 2, some people run 3. The reason why I decided to run 3 today is because I was running so many rush characters. Because I have so many rush characters, I can really bring the battle to the opponent. And if I'm hitting the opponent a lot in the early game with really high power attacks from Luffy, or after I use things like It's to Die For and ramp a dong, then it's easy for me to also weave in a Pudding to get rid of maybe 2 or 3 cards from the opponent's hand. Generally, I'm fine just slamming this when I have empty dong on my early turns after I've ramped to just get rid of a couple of cards from the opponent's hands, but also on the final turns when I decide to go for lethal and we've been slowly playing out the game and the opponent has something like 8 or 9 cards in their hand, I can slam this card and immediately go for lethal. So due to the fact that I want to play this in the early game as well as the late game, I think that 3 is a very good ratio. But of course, if you decide to play the game out a little bit slower, I can totally see coming down on these cards. It's fucking raining, man. On the game day, there were only 28 people at the flagship. Generally, there's supposed to be 32, but a couple of people had to cancel. This means that there's going to end up being 4 or 5 matches depending on how the games end up going. On this day, I ended up having 4 games. The first deck that I fought was Red Green Smoker, and it's not the general sort of Red Green Smoker that you're used to seeing. In Japan, people don't run 8-cost Skin in Red Green Smoker anymore. It turns out that because the red decks have access to Mole Pistol, 8-cost Kit doesn't really do that much. For this reason, people have stopped playing the defensive version of Red Green Smoker and instead now run an extremely aggressive list. My first game was against this version, and I actually outraced him to his life. I finished the game in about 6 turns. I played It's to Die For on 3 over my other ramp cards because I wanted the extra dome to be able to hit the leader for 7,000 power. This 7,000 power hit is almost guaranteed to go through. The next turn I have 6 dong and the opponent has 1 less life. I decide to hit him with 8,000 with my leader and then use the remaining 4 dong to play Pudding. By having 8-cost Luffy in my hand, I know that I don't need to ramp on this turn because next turn I'm going to be at 8 dong anyways. But I saw this really aggressive avenue, and because I know that recent Red Green Smokers don't run 8-cost Skid, I was banking on the fact that he doesn't either. I played 8-cost Smoker the next turn to be able to bounce back one of his blockers and just keep hitting leader, and then the next turn I played 9-cost Sanji into 9-cost Mom to just get rid of one of his 5-cost Smokers because he was, by all counts, high rolling as well. But due to this Pudding in the early game and the aggressive hits that I had in the early game, because of this 8-cost Luffy sticking to the board, he was not allowed to play any blockers for effectively the entire game, and I was able to just run him over by the 6th turn. I had what I needed to play the more aggressive route, and if I didn't, I would just play the defensive route and see how it goes. The second game was against Blue Doflamingo, and I triple ramped him, so game's over. Next game I played a mirror. I went first after winning the dice roll. I hit my 9 Sanjis, he didn't hit his 9 Sanjis, so game over. But the final game was really, really interesting. Going into this turn, this is what my hand looked like. My theory was that if I play this Nami and try to find something like another Gum Gum Giant, then perhaps I may be able to actually survive on this turn. As such, I decided to go for the defensive route. And although I don't find another Gum Gum Giant, I find 3 2k counters. So easily I get rid of the 2 cards without 2,000 counter, and this becomes my hand going into the next turn. I do the math on this, and if he goes for lethal normally, I'm guaranteed to survive this turn. If he uses Usohachi, I'm guaranteed to survive this turn. If he plays Pudding, I'm guaranteed to lose. And if he goes for a defensive plan, I'm also guaranteed to lose. As such, I need him to go for lethal on this turn. So I pass the turn to him, saying, just please don't have Usohachi or Pudding. I don't know if this had a psychological effect on him, but he decided to go for lethal. What he did here was start with 8,000. And obviously because his board is full, if he goes 8,000 here and replaces it with Usohachi to get rid of this Nami, then he's in a much better spot to go for lethal. However, I've already done the math the turn before, and I know that if I block with this and he decides to go over a defensive plan, I'm guaranteed to lose. So I need to bluff that I made a mistake to try to make him go for lethal. And as such, I use 1 dong to gear second. And this gives him the green light to then go for lethal. He replaces his Katakuri with Usohachi to get rid of my Nami blocker. He spreads out his dong and hits at 9, 9, 10, 10, 10, and with all of the counter in my hand, I managed to win down. We talk about this game after it finished, and he just didn't expect me to have this much counter in my hand. Minor misplay by him, because if he did try to go for a defensive plan, then he would have ended up winning. But I'd like to say that that is all in the heart of the cards. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to go home before I get it gold. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.